Welcome to the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast, brought to you by the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association. Here, we dive into the heart of Arkansas's cattle industry, where legislation, education, advocacy, and development come together to support the hardworking cattle producers of the natural state. Whether you're in the pasture or on the road, this is your connection to the people, policies, and programs shaping the future of our industry. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast. I am your co-host, Michelle Buffkin Horton.
And I'm your other co-host, Norley Townsend.
We're excited to be here with you this week. It feels like a very busy 2 weeks since our last podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We've had production sales. We've had lots of meetings with congressional people from our congressional delegation. We've also had our latest session of ACLC.
Mm-hmm.
So, what a whirlwind 2 weeks.
Lots of time on the road.
Yes. Yeah, so we can start with our ACLC. So we just wrapped up the fifth and final session of the 2025 ACLC programs, the Arkansas Cattlemen's Leadership Course. And so it's usually a crowd favorite. Almost everyone's favorite session. But if you will, tell us a little bit about what happened at ACLC this week, what they do.
Yeah, so I think it's the most favorite one, everybody says, because it's the most hands-on. So they come to Fayetteville. They have a couple lectures about what is the cuts of meat, different things. What else they learned about the first day? Cuts of meat.
Labels,
shelf life.
Food safety.
Yes.
Everybody's favorite topic, of course.
Yes, yeah. So they talked about that the first day, and then that night we got to have a burger cook-off. So they got to put those skills, like food safety skills, to use, cook a burger, and then the next day they got to actually fabricate out a half of a carcass. So that's really fun to watch. You are standing in the cooler room all day, which is kind of cold, but it's a lot of fun. And then and then they wrap up in the classroom again, learning about the backside of it and if they made any money off the carcass or not. So
yeah, so they actually get to, if you're watching online you'll see me, but if you're not, if you're listening, you'll just have to know I'm doing air quotes here. So they purchase an animal live on the hoof. They look at an animal, they bid on them. It's based on the current market prices. So they purchase an animal and then they actually go and fabricate it out like Norley said, and then it is calculated whether they made money or lost money on the grid, on the carcass, or on the cutout. And so there's a couple of different ways it can go. And so, but that way they can see a lot of different segments of the industry, the ends of the industry that we don't necessarily see within a cow-calf segment here in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. So it was a fun time. It's really great. This program, this session is sponsored almost in full by the Arkansas Beef Council, so we're very grateful for them for their sponsorship, led and planned by the University of Arkansas Animal Science Department, and so would not be able to do it without the two of those entities, and so able to actually teach them, like I said, just like the next steps of the industry. Mm-hmm. We do have somebody come in and talk about feed yards. We have somebody talk about every single thing, so you can see a lot of times I feel like producers' knowledge kind of ends on their segment of the industry, as it probably is normal to, but this gives them one step, maybe 3 steps further than they normally get to see.
Lots of information in 3 days.
Yes, yeah, a lot of things thrown at you. It just feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose sometimes, especially if you've not been on the meat side of it or the meats side of it before. So, but it's a good one. This session, like I said, that wraps up the 2025 session program. So all they have left is graduation here in a couple of weeks. At our fourth quarter board meeting, they'll also graduate. So really excited to be able to honor those people. But with that means our next round of ACLC applications are open, and we encourage you to apply. So what are the requirements, payments, anything like that for ACLC?
It is free, and the only requirement is you have to be older than 21.
Yes. And so applications are online. They're on our website. Fairly easy to find there. It's arbeef.org/ACLC. We make it very simple for the ACLC applications. I will say, there are questions on there. It shouldn't take you very long to fill out the application, but answer the questions. Think about what benefits you could bring and what you want to learn from the program, because we do look at every single application 20 people accepted every year out of usually about 40 to 60 applicants. And so it's usually a pretty tough competition pool there. But like Norley said, completely free, paid for by sponsors and fundraising. And so anyone within the state of Arkansas interested in the cattle industry.
It was brought to my attention that the form was kind of messed up at the bottom, but that is now fixed. So if you've had trouble applying, it should be fixed now. If you have any more trouble, let me know so I can fix it.
Yeah, I think it just wasn't stretched enough, so the submit button was hidden.
Yeah, it was.
You had to scroll and find it existed because other people have applied. I was like, so we had already had multiple applications. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just, if you're on your phone, sometimes it looks a little weird. We have learned. So,
Yep.
But yeah, so that's our recap of this past couple of weeks. Along with that, we also met with quite a few of our federal delegation, either with them themselves while they were in state or with their staffs, or via Zoom or phone call, as we were discussing the Argentinian beef import discussion that we talked about last podcast. And so we were able to meet with Congressman Hill, Congressman Womack, and Congressman Westerman, all in person. Our members and our leaders were there while the representatives were in state. And so we were able to have conversations in person with them. I know we had Congressman Crawford reach out as well to quite a few of our members and get their thoughts and opinions on the issue. And then also Senator Bozeman and Senator Cotton, we were able to meet with them via Zoom and talk about some of our concerns and thoughts there. So really grateful for our federal delegation for stepping up and for asking questions and trying to learn more and see what our thoughts and what our members' concerns were on that. And so it's been a busy few weeks, but we're really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share on behalf of the cattle producers all across the state what our thoughts were. So, yeah. With that, we're going to get into what we're going to talk about this week, which is more federal things. Oh, also, I guess, lastly, the federal government is still shut down. As of the recording of this podcast, I don't see anything changing before tomorrow, but just in case, a disclaimer, like this is all subject to change. But the federal government is currently shut down. It is the longest shutdown in the history now. So we're at 37 days. Tomorrow when this airs will be 38 days probably. The last federal shutdown longest was 35, and so pretty close there, but we are still in a shutdown. FSA offices have reopened limited capacity, and so Secretary Rollins announced that a week or so ago, and so announced that, and so we do have the extension for the Emergency Livestock Relief Program, ELRP. So if you live in a county that was eligible for ELRP payments via flood or wildfire, then you are eligible and now able to go through your FSA office, your local county FSA office, and apply for that program. And so I encourage you to do that. The deadline used to be October 31st. It has now been extended through November 21st, and so you have a little bit more time because of the prior FSA offices being closed. So we were able to get that extension for a bit, but I do encourage you, if you live in an affected county, you can find those on our social media. If you live in an affected county, go apply, call your local FSA office, reach out to them. So other than that, most things kind of remain in the same spot federal shutdown wise. Most things are closed. People are furloughed. Not much has changed there as much as we would like it to.
Yep.
So still having conversations about the need for the government to be reopened. So now with that, we're going to still talk about federal government, but not about the shutdown. So we are going to talk about the USDA and their plan that they came out with here a week or so ago.
Yeah.
So
what exactly did the USDA announce into this new plan?
Yep, so the USDA released a fairly broad plan within the last week or two, focusing on strengthening the cattle industry from the ground up. The official statement is that this is not tied to the Argentinian beef import discussion, but the timing of it was very close together. And so while this technically did not come from that, are they mutually exclusive? We don't know. And so, but they did not talk about a lot of that. It's not focused on new payments. It's not focused on like a temporary Band-Aid solution. It truly appears to be a long-term strategy focusing on access to federal grazing lands, increasing processing capacity, label transparency, and reducing unnecessary regulatory burdens to create a more resilient beef supply in the future that's going to be able to support producers in rural communities alike. And so it's a fairly broad plan. It's like a 12, 15-page document of the plan itself, with not a ton of necessarily like dates, data, here's the nitty-gritty of it, but more of a broad overview of how we're going to you can't call it rebuild the herd, because that's not what we're going to do. Like, that's not necessarily what this plan is to do, is to rebuild the herd, but is to continue to strengthen the cattle industry, I believe is the phrase that we're looking at. So, yeah.
There was a lot of talk online earlier this fall about the heifer retention payments. Can you clear up what that rumor came from, where that came from, and what USDA actually said?
Yeah, that came from social media. And so the answer usually is social media, Facebook. And so, yeah, back in October, there were some viral social media posts that were claiming that the USDA was going to pay producers X number of dollars. It varied depending on which social media post you saw, but X number of dollars to retain your heifers, but the number wasn't even worth retaining your heifers for in the current market. And so that was pretty quickly squashed by Secretary Rollins. I think a couple of days later, she was at an event and specifically stated, she's like, we will not be doing heifer retention payment programs. And so that ended pretty quickly, but I think a lot of it just, I don't know exactly where it started, if it was somebody just thought of it, or if somebody heard something and kind of misconstrued what was being said, or exactly where, but unfortunately for social media, and I actually gave a talk on this last week at the Forage and Grasslands Council, is that social media does not reward accuracy. Social media rewards engagement. And that one had a lot of engagement. And so people were very engaged, whether they liked or hated the plan. You got a lot of feedback, a lot of engagement, a lot of virality there, even though it wasn't at all, in this case, accurate. So that is not going to be happening. So far. Let's specify.
Yeah. Even we were like, what is going on?
Oh, I know. So I get phone calls and I was like, I have seen this, but I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
No one knows.
Yeah. So from your perspective, which parts of this plan could have the biggest impact on Arkansas cattle producers?
Yeah, so from an Arkansas standpoint, obviously, so a big piece of this plan is focusing on opening up access to federal grazing lands. That is not necessarily going to benefit Arkansas cattle producers, but I do think it's worth pointing out because it is going to benefit the nation's cattle producers because it's going to help us mitigate the fact that we don't have enough land to raise cattle on. Not necessarily, not only in this state, but especially where there are a lot more federal lands that are grazable. And so that's going to be a big piece of it, not necessarily for the cattle producers in Arkansas. You may not see the benefit directly from that, but you may be able to see some indirects coming in from it. I think the biggest one is going to be the support for local and expanding processing. And so that's going to be one piece of this program, is they are going to do another round of grants for local processors. And so expanding processing is going to be beneficial. And again, same reason we talked about it in COVID, was that as it brings back, it keeps money there in the local economy. It gives producers another option to market. Right now, you see a lot of producers taking their cattle to the sale barn because that is the thing that is most beneficial for them. And as long as that remains true, they have that opportunity. But at some point, that it's going to even out a little bit, I feel like, of direct-to-consumer marketing versus going the traditional route and going to a sale barn. Right now, when you put pencil to paper, it makes a lot of sense to go to the sale barn. And so it may seem odd that, like, now's the time. But now's the time to invest in processing capacity because it takes time. Another piece of it, not in this plan, but I actually just saw it come across my email here earlier, is there's a piece of legislation introduced in the Senate, because the Senate is still meeting and still voting and doing things. And there's been a piece of legislation introduced in the Senate that would allow people that have a state-inspected item, a state-inspected meat, sell across state lines. and remain within the compliance there. And so instead, normally you'd have to have a USDA inspection program. No, with the direct, it's called the Direct Act. It stands for multiple things. They love a good
Acronym.
Acronym there, yes, thank you. They love a good acronym, but it stands for lots of things. But it's a really unique opportunity there on top of adding in capacity, because that's a limit for people on a lot of our people in the state lines. So that's going to be a big piece of it. Some labeling things we're going to talk about here in a bit will be a big piece of benefit for producers. And then finally, I think the last one's going to be your depredation payments. So while we're not going to pay you to keep heifers, we are going to pay you if something actually attacks or hurts and kills your animals. And so depredation payment for mainly for Arkansas is going to be black vultures. And so we will see some depredation payments coming up in the future for that. And so that's going to be really nice to be able to recoup some lost assets and lost cash on calves or cows that get attacked by black vultures, where in the past we haven't necessarily had a great way to recoup that money. And so lots of different pieces, but I think the biggest ones are going to come back to the processing capacity along with the depredation payments and some labeling.
The plan also includes enforcement of the product of the USA rule starting in 2026. Why is that label important for cattle producers and consumers alike?
Yeah, so if you've been listening to the podcast for a little while now, you heard myself and Tanner Beamer, who used to do consumer or government relations for National Cattlemen's Beef Association, talk about the product of the USA label. Is actually at the very end of our podcast that we had with him, because it was an example of a local county cattlemen's association that made a difference on a national level. And so this is actually enacting what they were able to get done. So in the past, product of the USA label had a fairly large loophole in it, where it said you had to be raised, processed, or packaged in the United States to be able to have that label. It's a voluntary label program. Not a lot of people used it because of the loophole, because not a lot of American processed beef used it because of the loophole, because it wasn't necessarily all American processed beef. And so even though it says product of the U.S., and so that was that or. So raised, processed, or packaged in the U.S., they got a label. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago almost at this point, it's a year and a half ago at this point, it feels like, is we were able to get some changes made to that rule to close that loophole. The rules have been done for a year at least, where we could change this loophole and close the loophole to now it is and. It has to be raised, processed, and packaged in the United States to be able to bear that product of the U.S. label. And so it will be beef coming from the United States. And so again, that was actually a local county cattlemen's association out west that noticed it, brought it up, moved it up the ranks of their state, moved it up the ranks of NCBA, moved it up through the rulemaking process, and were able to actually get this change done. We were just waiting on the USDA for an enacted date, and this plan finally gave us one. So January 1st, 2026, USDA, FSIS will start actually enforcing that label. And so they will start inspections and start making sure that things fit within that raised, processed, and packaged in the United States. So all three of them have to be true to be able to have that. And so that's going to be a really big win for producers, because we have a lot of conversations, especially following this beef import discussion about where beef comes from. And we know that we import beef in this nation. We know that we are very, very good at raising fat cattle, but consumers like to eat ground beef. And they like to eat ground beef with a little bit of fat in it, or a little bit less fat in it. And so depending on the preference, we have anywhere from 80 to 97% lean. And so you want to make sure you have that opportunity for consumers. And so importing lean beef makes it where we can have lean ground beef, especially for fast food, for actual ground beef, whatever it might be. And so while we will continue at some point, in some level, in some capacity, importing lean beef, at least now, it will not be able to have that USA product of the USA label. So that's going to be a big win for our producers, because we know what we're producing in this country. We know we're very good at what we're doing, and so we want a lot of our members and a lot of our producers want to be able to support that and be able to show that to the consumer. And so finally having a start date on that program will be very helpful. And so while it will remain a voluntary program, it is something I think a lot more retailers, consumers, packer, whatever it may be, are going to start utilizing and start looking for, because it is going to close the loop hole that has existed for a very long time with that label. So,
yeah. Sorry, y'all. I'm still trying to get over this head cold from a couple weeks ago. USDA mentioned efforts to support small processors through reduced inspection costs and new grant funding. What opportunities might that create in Arkansas?
Yeah, so the reduced inspection cost is going to be a big win there. I think that's a big hurdle for a lot of producers, or for a lot of processors. Producers may not really think about it, but the processor has to pay for a USDA inspector to come in. They have to pay overtime, they have to pay holiday hours, they have to pay whatever it might be. And so it can add up very quickly, and it makes it hard for those processors to stay competitive. With the addition of a state program, it helped for sure. But having the ability, if somebody does want to go a USDA product, their processor can still be competitive with the ability to decrease the costs for the local processors. And then the other piece of it is going to be it's going to be the fourth round of what they're calling the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program. A lot of these started off in COVID when we saw the humongous jump in direct-to-consumer beef. And so program grants are going to make it easier for local processors to expand or even to modernize. I know in the state of Arkansas, I think there were like 19 to 20 processors that got funding the first time, or the first two times. And so it's going to be their ability to upgrade, or for new plants to come on, or for if somebody's like, hey, I didn't really want to do a USDA inspection program, but now we have a state inspected, maybe I want to upgrade some things so I could go state inspected. And so it's going to give, again, same thing we talked about in 2020, it's going to give producers more options to market their cattle down the road. Is it going to be for everybody? No, not necessarily. Not everyone's going to direct to consumer market their cattle. But if you want to, you're going to hopefully have the opportunity to do so at a reduced rate for inspection fees, but also for the for updated processing. And then I'm making sure it's not on here. I don't think it is. Okay. And then the final part of that plan was actually they're going to increase and invest money in the camera grading system. And so right now it's fairly limited. It's a new system utilizing, obviously, as you can imagine, cameras, but maybe not necessarily having a human inspector there for the USDA portion of it. You'll still have to meet, obviously, all the inspection guidelines, all the safety things, all of the pieces of the food safety requirements there, but having the ability to have a camera available to grade some pieces of the process will make it, again, cheaper for producers. And so we'll be interested to see kind of how that program picks up. They've done a few pilot programs on it, but we haven't seen large-scale adoption of it by any means. And so I'll be interested to see if local processors and companies start taking advantage of that. So.
Yeah. So the upcoming 2025-2030 dietary guidelines for Americans were mentioned in the plan. How could those guidelines influence beef demand or perception?
Yeah, so if you don't know, the biggest thing the dietary guidelines drive are going to be any federally managed food programs. So you think of the number one thing people always think of is schools. It's going to be a big piece of it, obviously. So if you get increased beef consumption in schools, it's quite a large population there. So if you can increase that, great. But it also is going to include nursing homes, prisons, anything that's going to be managed by or have the ability to have some influence by following those DSGs, those dietary guidelines, or DGAs, following the dietary guidelines. So we're really excited about that because you've already heard Secretary Rollins talk about the importance of beef. You're going to expect that from the Agriculture Secretary, but you've also heard Secretary Kennedy recently talk about the importance of lean ground beef in or lean beef in dietary guidelines for consumers, and so it's nice to see, even on the quote unquote what feels like sometimes the other side, on the health and human services side, to also say, hey, we recognize the importance of beef in our diets, as opposed to saying, hey, we need to get more protein from peas or lentils or wherever else it comes from. And so it's going to be nice. It's going to be very beneficial, obviously, for our population, for consumers, because they're getting nutrient-dense, high-quality protein. We know what we're providing, but it's also, once again, going to give a larger market for producers to take those products to, whether they're going to sell directly to the school, whether they're going to go the traditional route and go through a sale barn to a feedlot to a packer, and then that ends up back in the school. Either way, lots of opportunities there, as long as we can increase consumption. And so it's going to be exciting. I am curious to see if that includes an increase of the locally sourced products, because we did see in 2020 quite a bit of producers selling directly to schools. And then here recently, with a couple of changes within funding and everything else, some of those programs went away. And so producers weren't able to provide that meat directly to the school anymore. So I'll be curious to see, or interested to see, as they expand on this plan, if that's part of it, is like, not only that we're going to rewrite the dietary guidelines, but we're going to reinstate or relook at some of these plans to sell beef direct to schools again.
So how is the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association staying engaged with the USDA and policymakers to make sure Arkansas producers benefit from this plan?
Yeah, so our focus is always bringing real value back home, and so a lot of times it's big picture plans, it's big picture talks, it's how can we make sure that we're able to hone this in and focus on, like, that direct to school program. Okay, we know that's going to be a great opportunity for some of our producers that want to follow that. Like, how can we make sure that that is included? How can we make sure that we know black vultures are included in the depredation payments, but having those conversations about, yes, here's the big picture plan, how are we going to enact some of this? How are we going to enforce some of this? And what can we tweak to make sure that Arkansas is getting focused on? And so a big piece of that is having conversations with a lot of the staff at the USDA as they're coming out with new additional appointees at USDA. Senate is still confirming appointments over there, and so we're seeing those staffs as the directors or undersecretaries or whatever get filled. You're seeing a lot more of the lower level staff getting hired or changing over as well. And so having those conversations and keeping them top of mind, and keeping the cow-calf side top of mind, because as you know, there's lots of different segments of this industry, and so we want to make sure that the cow-calf, which is the majority of the people in Arkansas, are have some input and have some say.
So what's your message to ACA members who are learning bits and pieces of information online? How can they separate fact from fiction on issues like this?
Yeah, so one of the things I talked about last week on my presentation was looking at the source. If they are attempting to sell you something, usually it's not always the truth here, but also if it sounds too good to be true. Unfortunately, it's probably too good to be true. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish it was always like, oh, wow, like, this sounds great. And it actually is real. Not always. And so checking your sources, checking materials, seeing if you can find it anywhere else, even just by Googling it and saying, like, hey, does this exist anywhere else? Or is it just in this one little spot on Facebook? And so checking with your local county extension agent or your county or an extension specialist here in Little Rock. I talked a lot about on Friday. I was like, social media can be helpful, but again, social media doesn't reward accuracy; it rewards engagement, and so it can be, it's the age-old saying of like a lie has the chance to get around the world twice before the truth can even put its pants on, and so like misinformation spreads so quickly, and so it's a great tool, but take everything a little bit with a grain of salt there. But if you have questions, reach out to us, reach out to whoever and say, like, hey, like, let me look at this source. Have y'all heard this? Have you heard about the heifer retention payment programs? Like, are you able to talk to somebody at the USDA and see if this is real? We were able to and find out that was not real. And so that's a prime example of a lot of question marks out there. But when people actually called us, we were able to connect with USDA and determine that was not a program that they were going to be doing. So.
Yeah. And finally, what's the biggest takeaway you want Arkansas cattle producers to remember about USDA's new plan and how it affects them?
Yep. So I think the biggest thing is the fact that the USDA is willing to come to the table and willing to have these conversations. That's not necessarily always the case. They talked about reducing government regulations here, and that's definitely not always the case with a regulatory body that like USDA. And so being grateful that they're willing to have the conversations, willing to ask the questions, and willing to look at things a little bit differently. We know we have the smallest herd size in over 60-ish years, plus years, and so we know that. We know we're having really high markets, even with some crazy fluctuations in them. We know that we're coming out of a drought. We know all of these things. How can we all, as an industry, work together to address these issues, but also work together to make sure that this is here for the next generation? And I feel like that's where this plan is coming in. Is it a silver bullet? Is it going to solve everything? No. The answer is always going to be no. It's not going to solve everything. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a step in the right direction. And so being grateful for that, being willing to say, hey, like, what about this? Like, share your thoughts. If you have an issue or have a solution or have something you've thought of, like, it's never too small to pass on. And so a lot of these things came directly from work from state associations like ourselves, because we've all been working on a lot of these issues for a long time, and so it's nice to see some forward progress on them. But it's because of producers. It's because of members at the county level that said, hey, here's an issue I have. You know, it would be cool if people pay me when a black vulture kills my calf. We're like, got it. And so it takes a long time to get there, but it's finally coming to fruition, and so let's take advantage of it while it's here. So be willing to have the conversations, be willing to share your thoughts and your feedback with us, with your elected officials, and see what big changes and what big growth and support we can make for the industry. So that's it. That's what I got.
Yep.
So you can read the whole plan. We'll link it in the description or whatever. We'll link the whole plan there. Like I said, it's not a super in-depth plan. It's not going to tell you exactly how they're going to do every single one of these things, but it does give you a pretty good idea of what they're looking at and thinking of as they go forward. So, perfect. All right, where do they need to go? What do they need to do?
Subscribe. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, Arkansas Cattlemen's Association, Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast. Find us anywhere. Yeah, we appreciate y'all.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you here in 2 weeks.
Yep. See y'all later. This is the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast, your trusted source for all things cattle in the natural state.